If you learn these 11 tips, you'll be able to read a whiskey bottle like a pro. You probably didn't understand that. And that's probably how most of y'all feel when you're trying to read a whiskey bottle. Hey everybody, welcome back to Whiskey Unbound. So today we're gonna go over kind of a beginner's thing, how to read a whiskey bottle, right? So there's a lot of words that we see in the whiskey bottles. We go into the stores and we're like, what does that mean? What does proof mean? And what's the age statement if it's not on there? Like how old is it if not on there? What's the mash bill? What does that even mean? Things like that, okay? Hey, over there. Okay, so first up, we're going to look at proof and ABV, right? So proof, in simple terms, proof is just double the alcohol content. So alcohol by volume. So for example, if the alcohol by volume is 50%, then proof would be 100%. They're direct correlations of times 2. Now, you're into further details of where proof came from. Other countries really don't use proof very much. Americans use it a lot more. Basically, it's an old pirate thing where what they would do is if you could pour rum on gunpowder and still light it on fire, then it was proof that it was, good quality rum. It wasn't watered down or cut or made with different ingredients, things like that, right? So they regulated it more. Used to, it was like a hazmat thing. Like if I could pour it on there, I think the exact percentage is like 137 something, but now hazmats, we make it an even number, 140. It was proof that it was good quality whiskey. They made it a legal taxation thing where we tax alcohol off of the proof gallon, which would be 100 proof. So if you're making things at 100 proof, you're paying the exact taxes you should. If you're making things at higher proof, you're gonna pay more taxes. If you make it at a lower proof, you're still getting taxed at that 100 proof mark, if that makes sense, right? So number 2, we're gonna go on to age statement. So this is where we get to the word straight. Okay, so if I brought you a bottle and I said this is straight rye whiskey. Now this is a blend of straight rye whiskeys, but same thing, okay? So the word straight on a bottle means, number 1, there's no additives, right? So there's no colorings, there's no flavorings, there's no preservatives, nothing, right? So all the color, all the flavor would come from the distillate itself and the barrel, okay? The aging process, everything, right? Straight also means it's at least 2 years old. Now we get into a really silly technicality with this. So if it says straight and it is not age stated, then it is at least 4 years old, okay? If it says straight and there is an age statement, then it's gonna be 2 to 4 years old, okay? So for example, it's straight rye whiskey, there's no age statement, it has to be 4 years old, okay? But if it's not 4 years old, it has to be specifically age stated. So you had to say, hey, it's 2 years and however many months, or at least 3 years, or whatever it is, okay? Anything besides that, the word straight cannot be on there, okay? So you can have things like, Jack Fire or Jack Honey, whatever. That's not a straight whiskey, right? It's got flavor in it. And we don't know how old it is. It's usually gonna be either bottom of the barrel stuff, it's cut with a bunch of water, you got flavorings in there, right? That's not a true whiskey, okay? So now we get on to small batch, single barrel, blended, things like that, okay? So small batch would mean, now this is it's not a legal term, but this is going to be a more of a kind of arbitrary term, right? So a distillery is going to take a number of barrels and blend them together. Now, if I'm Jack Daniel's or Wild Turkey or Four Roses, like I'm gonna take thousands and thousands of barrels and blend them together. That's gonna be a small batch, right? Sometimes that could be hundreds. If I'm a small distillery, that might be 4 barrels, right? So there is no legal term on what small batch means. Now, your regular releases, your bottom shelf stuff like Jack Daniel's 7, Jim Beam, White Label, that is just take as many barrels as you can, blend them together, and by the law of averages, you're going to reach a consistent profile, right? So that's why every Jack 7 tastes the same. Every Jim Beam White Label tastes the same, because even if you have really one-off weird barrels, if you blend enough together, it's going to be consistent every single time, okay? Now, you'd move on to what is a single barrel, okay? Single barrel is exactly what it sounds like. Single barrel is the whiskey in this bottle came from one single barrel, okay? So there's different levels of single barrel. Let's cover them. Number 1, the most common one is going to be the distillery's single barrel release. So Jack Daniel's single barrel, right? That is Jack Daniel's going through their own product and selecting barrels to put single barrel label on. Now again, it is one single barrel, And it's going to fit pretty closely to what the Jack profile would be, right? But they're not going to go pick the most exceptional barrel, and they're not going to go pick the most highest proof or the whatever off-profile barrel. They're not going to do that because they still want to kind of have some consistency, right? Then the next level would be the distillery single barrel, but like a more of a private select thing, right? So for example, Russell's Reserve Private Select. So this is a single barrel, and the Russell's Reserve also makes a 10-year single barrel, which is a regular shelf release product. But this is a very specific single barrel, right? So this is a more exceptional pick from that distillery, right? These can vary a lot more in profile than your regular shelf release single barrels, okay? And then you would have what you call a store pick, right? Now again, like I said, store picks are always going to be single barrels. So for example, this says private batch, specs, wine, and spirits, right? So this is going to be a pick from a specific group, right? So me or Bourbon Group or whatever store goes to that distillery, they pick through those barrels and they can pick anything, right? If they're going to Jack Daniel's, they might pick a bottle that has no flavor profile even close to Jack Daniel's, because barrels can do wild things sometimes. Right? Now, what's really cool about store picks is that you know someone has gone through and specifically tasted that barrel. So store picks usually are more of a unicorn type thing. They carry more value as far as rarity. And that's why they're kind of more sought after, right? All right, next up would be a bottled in bond. What does bottled in bond mean, okay? So we do a full video on this, and I do actual tasting on just bottled in bond. Very, very, very cool topic, very cool label on whiskey. So bottled in bond started in 1897. It was the first government act on food and drugs. So here's what bottled in bond means legally. So it has to be at least 4 years old. So it can be more, but it has to be a minimum 4 years old. Has to be exactly 100 proof. Okay, no additives, no colorings, no nothing. It has to be a straight whiskey. Okay, go back to that term, straight. All right. It has to be distilled in one single distilling season. So you have the spring distilling season, and then you have the fall distilling season. Okay, has to be made in one season. Right, has to be made by one distiller. So you can't take Four Roses mash bill, mix it with some MGP mash bill. Even if there's no additives, 4 years old, 100 proof, you can't do it. One distillery, one distilling season, 4 years old or more, 100 proof, okay? The biggest kicker with all this, and this is where really different brands kind of come off from this, it has to be monitored by the government, all right? So you have agents on site that are monitoring all this, that have keys to the rick houses and to everything in the distillery, and they're monitoring this, right? Now, this is not as prevalent today because of all the regulations just the government has in general, but back in the day, I mean, you had watchdogs on this stuff, okay? So really cool products. So during that time when Bottled Bond came out, this was the good stuff. Like if it didn't say Bottled and Bond on it, you're risking, you're not really gonna get something that's super quality maybe. So if you saw Bottled and Bond on something, it was worthy to pick up, and it's a great badge to have. It's what all the distilleries wanted to have. We're getting away from it now more because it's more of a novelty. It doesn't carry as much weight because you can't do as many things with it. It's more restrictive. But back in the day, Bottled and Bond was a huge deal. All right, now takes me to finished, right? So by definition, bourbon has to be, bourbon, rye, and wheat whiskeys, as far as America is concerned, has to be aged in a brand new charred oak barrel, okay? You cannot use X wine barrels or X Scotch barrels or X, or fill in the blank, okay? You have to use brand new charred oak barrels. What you can do is you can take that product when it's done and finish it in a different barrel. So Angel's Envy was the first one to do this, and people were like, oh, is that legally bourbon? Like, well, you can't really call that bourbon. Like, well, there's no laws against it because you made a bourbon, you made a product, and then you finished in a different barrel. So what does that mean? So you pick a bottle and say, okay, it's a cigar blend, bourbon whiskey, finished in Armagnac, sherry, and cognac barrels. Okay, well, what does that mean? So this was an 8-year bourbon, right? And then it was taken out and put into Armagnac, sherry, and cognac barrels. So we acquire barrels from different countries of different spirits, tequila barrels and rum barrels and sherry barrels, whatever. You take that rye whiskey or that bourbon whiskey or that wheat whiskey and you put it into an emptied cask that contained a different spirit, and then you finish it. Now again, that's arbitrary. 6 months, 18 months, a year, whatever you want to do. But it adds a little bit of essence from that previous spirit with it. Okay, next up, sweet versus sour mash. This one's really quick and easy. All right, so you look at the bottle, it says sour mash. What does that mean? Okay, so they're going to, whenever you're distilling, you're doing a pot still, you're going to leave some of the physical mash, the physical grain that you distilled with. You're gonna leave a little bit of that in the pot as you make the new batch. Okay, what that does is it lowers the pH level. It helps with bacteria and cleanliness purposes, right? So sour mash whiskey does not mean it is a sour whiskey, okay? Sweet mash, same process, you just clean it out every single time. So you don't use back distillate from the previous batch, all right? Sweet mash does not mean it's going to be sweeter, okay? Again, does it change the profile? Yes. If I was to take the same mash bill and make a sour mash and a sweet mash, same barrel, same age, everything, they would be different whiskeys, right? But it's sour versus sweet does not mean it's a sour versus a sweet profile. It's just a process, okay? Last but not least, distilled in versus distilled by, okay? So if you turn the bottle over to the back, every bottle by law has to have this. It will tell you where it is distilled and bottled, okay? So if I turn over a bottle, and really easy to do this, you turn a bottle over and it says distilled into Indiana, okay? And then aged in or bottled by or bottled in Colorado or Wyoming or Texas, whatever it is. That means that whiskey was distilled in Indiana, gonna be MGP, all right? And then it was taken to X state and aged and blended and whatever they want to do with it then, okay? And that's where it will say bottled by. Right, now if it says distilled by, then that distillery, whatever is on the label, so for example, turn this over, right? Distilled by Jim Beam in Claremont, Franklin, Kentucky, right? Distilled and bottled by. So if it says distilled by, whatever is on that label, they distilled it and they bottled it. So they're not getting it from someone else, if that makes sense, okay? And you gotta be careful with that. You gotta look at those things because, again, I don't think there's anything wrong with MGP, but you just turn a bottle over, distilled in Indiana, right? So people will make different mash bills and different projects, and then they'll throw their label on it, and it's like, okay, well, that's not that much different than that, and it's way more expensive, blah, 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 right? So it's just something to pay attention to. Again, I'm not a hater on sourcing. I love sourced whiskeys, right? But it's just something to pay attention to, and it helps you kind of navigate kind of what you're doing, right? So if y'all had any questions on this or something was confusing, you want more clarifications, just let me know in the comments, and hope to see y'all next time.